in the bathroom this morning.
Well, she's authorized.
That's been
Was that?
That's
very,
authorized.
especially Tim has a new job.
Is the microphone on?
Okay, I've got 3 o'clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and call the meeting, regular work session meeting for the Sierra Vista City Council
Life is just so much easier.
for 22nd October. Call it to order. The first subject on the agenda today is the October 24th council meeting with the attached agenda. So obviously, we'll start with the call to order. We'll do the roll call, the invocation, the pledge, awards and presentations, and we got Fire Prevention Month coming up. And I want to thank everybody for being here today to help celebrate the National Cities and Towns Week this week. So I appreciate you coming out for the meeting. You didn't know that, did you?
That's exactly why they're
Now
here.
we do.
And now we do. Okay. Let's see. Fire prevention. Mr. City Manager, is there going to be anything on your report that we need to discuss?
No, it should be pretty routine, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. The first item is the tabled item on refuse. Are we going to get an update briefing today on refuse?
Sharon's got it.
Sharon's got it? Okay.
Nope, wrong one. All right, good afternoon, Mayor and members of council. This is an update to the previous presentations we've given on the refuse fee and rate proposal. Today's should be fairly short and is also in line with what was discussed at the last work session. So just a quick recap, and this slide was shown at the last work session as well, Refuse Fund Financial Review. Basically what this slide shows is our ending net position for last year in the Refuse Enterprise Fund. These are unaudited numbers at this point, but we ended up in the red by about $110,000. That doesn't tell the whole story because we started the year in the black by $330,000. So actually the loss on the account for last year is the $439 number. So that is what we are attempting to overcome in our fee proposals and rate proposals. So this is the original proposal that I had submitted to you about a month ago, the one contained in the current resolution. And you can see all the numbers there, how everything shakes out, what we were looking at for the different revenue brought in by the different fees. I don't really know there's anything there I need to elaborate on. The one that hasn't received a lot of discussion is the increased dumpster fees. The others, special pickups and drop-offs, have gotten quite a bit of discussion over the last month. But moving forward, based on the discussion at the last work session, this is the updated proposal that we are making to council, obviously subject to additional discussion. This has not been put into a revised resolution at this time because we're looking to get council's input on what that revised resolution would look like. But just to go through some of the numbers fairly quickly, special pickups, if you recall, in the original proposal, they were $44.85. We're now looking at $30 a load in year one. So a significant drop there. Compost, based on, again, discussion at the last meeting, we would be looking at a differential rate structure, a $10 drop-off fee for city residents and $15 for county and commercial. And then also increasing the sale price of compost at $10. Currently, we charge $15, so it would go up to $25. And you can see the resulting revenue numbers on each of those. And then the proposed dumpster fees, as I noted, not one that we've gotten any comments on, really, so that aspect of our recommendation remains unchanged at this time. Yes?
Is that a service that gets a lot of use, that dumpster service?
Residential dumpster, yes, I would say it does get a lot of use, and it has been seems to be increasing in popularity. We think one of the reasons for that is it is drastically underpriced right now.
But no comments from the public or anything on that?
No comments from the public. And then in line with what was discussed at the
Can I
last.
add a comment on that?
Yes.
My own comment. This is Sarah's own comment on this. I just driving here through the, my regular driving from to my kids' school, like a mile. There's 6 at least houses that have dumpsters in their front yard, and they've been there for years and years and years. So I'm just saying, if there was an incentive for them to not keep dumpsters on their front yard.
Well, isn't there part of this proposal that limits the amount of time the dumpster stays?
Yeah, with an additional charge.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, the time frame would be put into another document that we have, another action. We're hoping that by increasing the fees, that disincentivizes people to keep the dumpsters for extended periods of time, because that was the whole point of the program to begin with, was to bridge a short-term need where people were doing a home renovation project. It was never intended that they would sit in somebody's front yard for years. Now, if the
Something like
fees...
a decade, a whole decade.
A decade.
Dumpster's been in front of the house for a decade. Just saying.
If the fee...
The garden feature.
It's the city's property, the city's dumpster,
Next to the
you know,
car for
sitting
sale.
in front of someone's house for a decade.
If the fees were not to be sufficient to curtail that problem, then we would look at, codifying something that says that dumpsters are limited, in rental duration for 30 days, 90 days, whatever is chosen by council.
Even 6 months.
Real quick, I thought we talked about with the compost drop-off fees to eliminate a charge still, at least one free charge for residents of the city. And try to come up with a way to track that instead of charging $10 for city residents.
I think part of the challenge, there was a lot of discussion on this item at the last work session, ranging from free up to $10, $15, even upwards from there. Okay. So for right now, we've put the numbers in there as $10 for city, $15 for county. We did talk at the last work session about a free drop-off, and there was some challenges presented with that type of a program. Those aren't insurmountable, but there were some challenges presented doing that.
Bottom line is, we didn't really come up with a consensus to be
That's
able to give
Roger.
the staff guidance.
Roger, okay. Also, Mr. Mayor, we're also trying to find the best compromise way to meet the number that we need to meet in order to balance the fund. So this fee proposal is part of that, trying to find a reasonable fee that would generate the revenue combined with the rest of the fees to meet the $430,000 that we need to meet to balance the fund. So lowering this fee, we would have to probably make up the difference somewhere else then.
Can I ask another question on that? So there's currently no fee at all for commercial drop-offs, or there is?
There is. For county and commercial drop-offs, there is a
Commercial's
fee currently. Yeah.
$5, right?
I believe it is $5. Yeah.
Okay. How do you, right now, how do you know if someone's commercial? Like, how do you do?
We judge based on the trucks primarily. A lot of them we know. They come back. Commercials tend to come back more regularly than residentials do. Residentials, you do a cleanup project once a year, twice a year. Commercials come in more regularly than that, but some of them also run a more robust business than others do. So it can be very difficult to judge, especially if they're using unmarked trucks. I can tell you the bigger companies in town, the ones we tend to see every day, a couple times a week, they pay their fees without complaint. They know they're commercial, and they pay their fees without complaint.
Okay.
All right, and just ending with, at the work session 2 weeks ago, it was mentioned the possibility of also including a 5% residential rate increase. So you see that in year one and the revenue impact of that. And then we also have made some recommendations for year two, specifically increasing the special pickups by $5 a load to 35, and then a second 5% residential rate increase in year two. The net impact in year one is about $428,000, and the total increase over 2 years would raise about $577,000 in additional revenue.
Okay, the question I got about this residential rate increase information, we hadn't talked about residential rates before in any deep extent, but this is part of the whole package to make the system whole.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay.
So,
You know, for the benefit of council and the public, the Refuse Enterprise Fund, it's called an enterprise fund in that it runs as a business, and therefore it does need to pay for itself over time. There aren't any other funds that are commingled in there. It's the rates we charge for refuse services that are that generate the revenue to pay for the costs associated with it.
Go ahead.
Sharon, in the work session, you had said that in the projections from staff, in the original projection, you had seen about a 20%, I think you factored in about a 20% decrease in
Yes.
use. Is that still with the updated?
Yes, that is accurate.
Okay.
Ma'am.
so I just want to make sure, so what you're presenting to us now is ultimately about a 10% increase, 5% this year, and then 5% next year?
Effectively, yes. A rate increase, and then that would be in addition to the fee increases. And the reason for that is we had originally proposed higher level of fee increases. The feedback that seemed to be coming in was that those fee increases were pretty substantial, and was there another way to raise money in the enterprise fund without putting it all on fee increases? There is, and that is through a rate increase.
Okay, because I guess my understanding, or I guess my feeling, and perhaps I'm wrong, but my feeling after we left the last work session was that we weren't going to do this year.
That's what
That we were going to do the fees and leave the rates for next year. I believe I specifically remember Mr. Mayor making the comment.
That was discussed.
that was my understanding too.
Chuck?
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Wolf, that is certainly something the council can choose to do. Based on the numbers, we're projecting that if you do choose to do that, we will, run at a loss next year as well. And at some point, we're probably going to be looking at a more substantial. So you can choose to do that, but at some point, the issue will need to be readdressed.
And do we have any idea how much the rate would be if we did privatize the system?
If we,
Because, for example, I know, and unfortunately, in front of me, I know, for example, Wilcox is basically privatized, and they're running at $23, and I want to say 49 cents a month. But I called a couple other places, but that's just what's coming to
if we
mind
could
right now.
advance, please.
Yep.
I had Jen take a look at comparable cities our size and also the county bills for privatized service. And you'll see our rate in comparison with those other cities. Everybody, does things a little bit differently. Some do contract. But if you can, if you take a look at the bottom, those are three separate bills of county residents that we were able to obtain, and it shows a significantly higher cost for refuse pickup than what the city would charge, even with the rate increases proposed.
And am I remembering correctly from last year that we have a higher tipping fee than the rest of these comparisons
With city.
with the county?
Yeah, well, within the county, everybody, pays the same tipping fee. That's part of the Cochise County system. Outside
Yeah.
the county, yes, there probably are lower tipping fees than ours. The reasons for that are twofold. One is the distances for travel costs, transport costs associated with bringing refuse from all over the county to the landfill. The second reason is our volumes are much smaller than other areas, and unfortunately, refuse is a volume business.
I bring it
The
up.
less volume you have, the less, economies of scale you have, and that's
Right.
the reason for that.
I just think since we're paying so much more for tipping, we're doing well considering. That's just the point I'm thinking, because
That's a good point, Ms. Humphrey, because if you looked at it on the bright side, and certainly a proposal for a rate increase is not a bright thing, but if you look at, what our tipping fees are and compared with others, and then it really all flows down to rates ultimately and what the people are charged for refuse services. Our operation actually is very efficient outside of the tipping fee when you look at the rate comparisons with other communities.
yeah, if I can ask, if we, with the 5 functions that we have under this enterprise, I know overall it's negative, but do we know individually where the break even is for each section? Like, I want to know exactly which area is subsidizing for which and how much.
I would have to defer to Dave if he has any data on
And as
that.
Dave comes up, I think the first proposal on the rates, Ms. Humphrey, is closer to what the break even would be for each area. So the $45, let's say, for a special pickup is far closer to the break even for that particular service as the one
Well-
we're proposing. So that would be essentially
That,
subsidized.
well, okay, but that's not what was said at the work session. It was said that the $23 was the break even, or the 23 whatever. That's what Victoria said. And then when we look at the breakdown of the $45 in the email from my inquiry, it's not that. It's like 30. Actually, let me just pull it up.
Two were
I
different.
thought it was 27. Was,
Yeah, it wasn't 45.
Mayor, members of council, make sure, I was not here for that other work session, but please make sure you're comparing apples to apples and oranges to oranges. There are two pieces to this. You have, for a special pickup, you have the cost of the drivers and the truck to go out and pick things up. For green waste, there is no tipping fee because we drop it at our compost facility. For the regular special pickups, the cost to go to your house and load up the truck with green waste or refuse, rubbish, is the same. The difference is if you have a special pickup of garbage with a tipping fee associated with that. That's where it gets to be variable because we then have to, the regular residents pick up the cost of that refrigerator that the person paid $14 for us to go take to the landfill. That's where you start to get to the difference in cost between a yard waste, green waste special pickup and a trash special pickup. And that's, I think, where some of the confusion is coming in, is because you've got a cost to get to the house and back, green waste, and you got a cost, and Sharon's people have, based off what they pay on Wednesdays for tipping, their estimate of how much trash we are depositing at the landfill. And that's where that extra cost for those special pickups comes in. And that's why the cost for the two is very different.
Well, I think what's being asked here, David, is not that, not
Well,
what you,
but that's
what you
just-
answered.
Yeah.
What she's trying to ascertain is if I have a special pickup at my house, what are the costs associated with that, and are we fairly charging those costs for that item? And then, if I have a dumpster in my house for a month or 2 months, whatever we decide the time frame's gonna be, am I covering the cost by my paying for that dumpster, or is it being subsidized by another part of the fund? And that's,
Right
I
now?
think, what you're looking
Thank you.
for.
Yes, that's,
Try to figure out,
Thank
to make
you.
sure that,
Currently is being subsidized.
well, we know, yeah, but to what extent and what actually are the numbers is what she's asking.
Okay, I misunderstood the question, which is why I called David up. I
Sorry.
thought it was, commercial subsidizing residential. That's not what you're asking. The 4485 figure that we had presented originally was our cost plus a markup on those services. That markup was intended to include the things that we can't account for right now, because we calculated our cost of doing business today, which would not include any health insurance increases in the future, any pay increases in the future, gas prices going up. So that's why we put a markup on it. We also set green waste and bulky pickups at the same rate, even though, as Dave noted, bulky pickups have a disposal fee associated with them currently, whereas green waste does not. So when we looked at our actual costs of doing business, those were the numbers that were presented to you at the last work session. Does that answer the question?
not entirely.
So it blends zero tipping fee with the bulky items that have a tipping fee. So the $23 is blended.
I mean, that clears up the one thing that came up after my question, but I still, can we find out what the break even is for each function of our enterprise?
So commercial.
We could work on that. Historically, commercial is always subsidized residential. It's just been the history of it. It tends to be with, as Chuck mentioned, volume business. You've got your business, you've got an 8 cubic yard dumpster in the back. You have residences that have 65 and 95 gallon cans. That is about 0.4 of a cubic yard. So we've tried to match the disposal cost the same, but realizing it takes 20 houses to match that one pickup for your commercial dumpster, the driver costs have historically been averaged. And by doing that, the commercial is subsidizing the residential. We could go back through, break out specifically the drivers on the commercial routes that are on average, the drivers on the residential routes on average, try to put together, and again, you have the other challenge of we pay by ton and pick up by volume. Public Works tries to have an average of how many tons each cubic yard is, but that obviously changes with seasons and things like that and what's being put in there. But a few years back, we worked on an average cost. So it'd take a little bit more work, but we could put together an actual by driver, by function, by vehicle, maintenance logs and everything, exactly the cost of each piece of the pie with an overhead cost that you can't really associate. I mean, the billing people, the front desk people who mails in their bills here versus sends it off, but you could have the direct driver costs could be broken out and vehicle costs.
I realize it's a lot. I know. I think it would help us understand what we have to address and prepare us for keeping a healthy business in the future if we knew where it was that we were.
Ms. Uffrey, we can certainly give you those costs.
Thank you.
And also, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, this doesn't have to be determined today. The rates, if you choose to look at a rate increase or if you choose to look at these fee increases, that can be done in December. So we still have time for more discussion with regards to this issue. And if you want more numbers run, we can certainly do that.
And based off council's request, we did put on the website after the last work session that you are considering the rate increase. And the December 14th meeting is the first one you could actually vote on a rate increase for the residential routes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Mr. President. I'm trying to promote him.
Promote me, demote me,
Some
whatever.
clarification real quick. Residential, if I'm taking a dumpster and dropping it off at a residential private house, is that residential or commercial?
That, when I'm talking residential and commercial, I'm talking the can that you have. You have a 95-gallon can or a 65-gallon can.
And that's residential.
You are in you're on a residential route because it uses a side loader truck to pick it up.
Tracking.
We have businesses that are on a residential route because they don't tend to have a lot of food product. They came over when we had recycling and a lot of paper product, and they don't generate 2, 3, 4 cubic yards of trash to be picked up twice a week. They generate basically 95 gallons of trash a week and don't need to pay a commercial front-loading dumpster. A commercial route, as far as we're concerned, is it's a front-loading truck with a dumpster.
Okay.
Las Brisas that has dumpsters in their area, that's a commercial route. The person that goes down the street stops at the small office building on the corner and then courthouse. That is a residential route.
Okay.
We saved money and we helped some businesses out that didn't need that, and they came on the commercial route, and it fit in perfectly with how Darren set stuff up, and they did a great job getting those people, and also made the commercial routes more efficient by doing that.
Okay.
And you can't have a dumpster in your yard as a residential person, but that's a
Right.
special pickup operation.
Exactly.
It's not a normal operation, okay?
Another question real quick, if I may. So we already plan to subsidize the enterprise fund for this fiscal year. So if we don't raise rates yet, we'll have to address it, but we already addressed it in the budget when we did the budget to supplement.
Go ahead.
Actually, no. What it is this year, the fund will have a negative fund balance.
Okay.
Fiscal year 19 will end with a negative fund balance. We can carry a negative fund balance for a while, but sooner or later, the auditors and others are going to want to know how you're going to address this.
Roger.
To go back to Chuck's comment earlier, Councilmember Wolf, we do not like to do what we had to do shortly after the automated refuse system was put into place. We used to have the guys on the back of the truck. We tried to save costs by going to this automatic loaders, which we did. But despite doing that, we still had to do two 20% rate increases 2 years in a row. We did one year, we did it 20% the next year. And that is not something that staff likes to come to you and do. We know that council doesn't like it. So by trying to do smaller ones earlier, we hope to try to prevent that. That's why we try to look forward like we are and what is going on, and why we presented it this year. Because if you do wait, you may have to do 210. If you wait a year or two to do this, you might have to do a 10 or 15% increase at one time to bring the fund quicker to a whole.
Do you have something else?
No, sir.
Okay. What I'm hearing from council is that this will probably be staying on the table on Thursday. Somebody tell me I'm totally wrong?
Yeah, and I have one more question.
Okay.
Sorry. I forgot to, after the break-even number, second year, if everything went through with the 5% and the 5%, we'd be making 138,000 more than what we're losing right now. Is that enough is that the number we need to rebuild our reserve fund? How much were we setting aside? Maybe I should just ask that. What were we setting aside before that we got to that place where we had the reserve fund?
Basically what it was is every year of revenues over expenditures, that went into the reserve fund. And we build up a reserve fund so that when times are getting tough in there, or when the county was working on all of their stuff to try and fix their situation, looking at privatizing and all of that, we have a balance so that we don't have to every year come with a rate increase. That's why we have one. Hopefully, depending on what happens in the recycling situation, the tipping fees seem to be stabilized. Don't know how long before the county's paid back from the landfill, and maybe tipping fees could even go down if that's paid off. See what's the operations there at the time. It's very fluid, and it's hard to give you a number because so much can change. I mean, 3 years ago, no one expected this to happen in recycling.
All
And
right.
it caught everybody off guard in the world, and it's a worldwide problem.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Bill?
The 60-day comment period and stuff, I'm thinking if if we take this, you said December is the earliest we could even vote on it,
On the rate.
on the rate. So if we, but if we don't take it off the table, all we're doing is pushing this back to almost, I
Another
mean,
2 weeks, it'll be January.
Yeah,
First part of
exactly.
January.
so,
We're required to do a 60-day public hearing.
Roger.
Well, there has to be, once we decide to change it, we have to have a 60-day public comment period before we can actually vote on finalizing the rates.
Roger. Okay.
Mayor, all that needs to be noticed on the website is you're considering raising rates. We do not have to have the actual rates on the website.
Well, it would be good to have,
Yes.
yeah,
Be good to have them on there. Yeah.
okay. So,
Thank you, Dave.
any other questions?
Sir.
Good discussion. Staff, appreciate your efforts and your comments.
We'll bring you the updated numbers at the next meeting.
Okay,
With the break-evens of each.
So they have the direction they need to move forward.
yeah. Okay, well, she gave him a whole list of things that we need to hear about before we vote on it next time.
I know, I just,
No,
I
don't-
keep
no, that's good.
pushing this back.
We all need to be ready and have enough information to make a good decision. Yep. Okay, so that was item 2, and we now go to item 3, requests for rezoning of number 70 North Carmichael. And Jeff,
Yes.
staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let me find the presentation. There it is. Perfect. Thank you. This is a request, rezoning request for 700 North Carmichael Avenue. If you look at the map, it is located at the northwest corner of North Carmichael and Tacoma Street. You'll notice that the Len Roberts Park is to the east, as well as Carmichael Elementary School. A little bit of background on the rezoning request. This is a rezoning from neighborhood convenience, which allows for a low-impact commercial such as smaller retail, smaller office uses, to single-family residential 8, which does allow for single-family residences, residential homes, on a minimum lot size of 8,000 square feet. This particular lot size is 8,100 square feet and does meet that threshold of 8,000 square feet. The applicant is proposing to repurpose an existing commercial building for residential use. The commercial building was last used as a church on the property, and they now want to use it as a residential home. Looking at staff analysis, we first looked at the site suitability in terms of it being consistent with the surrounding zoning and land use. The property is surrounded by residential, as I stated, on the north, west, and south, Carmichael Elementary, Len Roberts Park on the east. So it is suitable for this area. Looking at the ability to serve, North Carmichael Avenue and Tacoma are both local residential streets. North Carmichael has an average daily trip of 1,559, and then Tacoma has 888 ADT. Typical single-family residential home generates about 10 ADTs, so there'll be no significant impact on the streets with this rezoning. Compatibility with the surrounding area. In terms of it being commercial, there are really a number of restraints if somebody wanted to build a commercial property on this particular site. There's setback issues, buffering issues, and parking requirements, not to mention the negative impacts on the residences if it were indeed to continue to be commercial. So therefore, the highest, best, and most compatible use on this property is residential. And finally, is the rezoning consistent with the general plan? The general plan designates that the land use for this property is medium-density residential, and SFR 8 is classified as a medium-density residential land use on our zoning, on our land use maps. So therefore, it is consistent with the general plan. The applicant, as required, held a neighborhood meeting on September 21st, 2019. There were approximately about 8 members of the public that did attend the meeting. There was only one concern regarding the rezoning that had to do with the fact that that the house may become a halfway house or a group home. The applicant has stated that this will not be the case. It will be used for residential purposes. The Planning and Zoning Commission did unanimously approve the request on October 15th. No members from the public did attend the hearing. The city also did their own notification to all neighbors within 500 feet of the property. City has received no public comments. And that does conclude staff's report.
Thank you, Mr. Pregler. Questions for Mr. Pregler? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So the property immediately adjacent to it is also commercial, or is light commercial?
Neighborhood convenience?
Oh, is that, okay.
Yeah, that's correct. And so the applicants actually purchased both properties. They're keeping that northern property as neighborhood convenience. They're just rezoning this property at the corner to residential.
Okay.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'm going to recuse myself since I'm on that map. My home is in that 500 feet, and I attended the neighborhood meeting just to meet who my new neighbors would be, and or I guess they're gonna rent it out. But they're a very nice family, and they already had Sierra Vista Remodeling looking at it and giving them estimates. So I'm excited to see something happen with that empty house, or it used to be a church. But yes, I'm gonna recuse myself.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Jeff, we'll look forward to voting on this on Thursday.
Okay.
We'll move on to item number 4. There's some code amendments.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. This is the next in a series of code amendments that were identified by the Planning and Zoning Commission as deserving attention as part of their annual work program. The provisions were hammered out over the series of 3 work sessions, and the final version resulted in a couple sticking points that ended in a split vote. Generally, we tried to reach a consensus before bringing amendments forward, but we weren't able to bridge a gap on this case. Starting with the definition, accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, are secondary apartments on a residential lot. They are often referred to as ancillary apartments, mother-in-law suites, cottages, granny flats, or guest homes. They are subordinate in size and accessory to the main home. ADUs are more than a she shed or a man cave. They are independent living facilities that must have a separate entrance, sleeping area, and full bathroom facilities. ADUs offer multiple benefits. There's an increasing trend of multi-generational living. Elderly parents are moving in with their kids, and cash-strapped college grads are moving back with mom and dad. They can benefit homeowners by providing extra income that could help pay down the mortgage and cover daily living expenses. From a land use perspective, ADUs are small in scale and can be easily integrated into the neighborhood fabric and take advantage of existing infrastructure. Furthermore, ADUs are supported by the city's general plan, Vista 2030, as a means to promote quality, affordable housing options. This proposal furthers the strategy of encouraging new regulations and incentives to permit accessory dwellings. Under the current code, a homeowner wishing to construct an accessory dwelling unit must go through a conditional use process involving public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. The public notice and review fee is $525. The application is evaluated on a case-by-case basis to determine impacts and whether special conditions are needed to address those impacts and fit with the proposed location. Currently, only detached accessory dwelling units are permitted. The proposed amendments would allow an ADU to be attached and integrated into the main house or be built as a detached unit. Only one accessory dwelling unit would be permitted per lot. So what's being proposed? Staff is recommending that accessory dwelling units be permitted by right, subject to compliance with certain design, location, and use restrictions being met to ensure neighborhood compatibility. Detached dwelling units are required to be situated behind, excuse me, I lost my place here. Okay. Rather than leaving a homeowner guessing on how to develop an application that might be acceptable to the city, we're suggesting that the city enact easy-to-follow standards that lay out a well-marked path to approval. Under this proposal, ADUs be permitted by right, subject to compliance with the proposed development standards. to ensure neighborhood compatibility. As part of the administrative review and approval process, notification will be sent to adjacent property owners. The notification will include the plot plan and architectural elevations of the proposed ADU, a description of the applicable development review standards, and the procedure for providing comment on the application. Turning now to the general provisions that are being proposed regarding location and placement. The accessory dwelling unit may be added to or located within the principal dwelling unit or located in a detached structure. Detached dwelling units are required to be situated behind the front face of the principal building. To minimize impacts, no more than 2 occupants may reside in accessory dwelling units. Moreover, they cannot be sold off or subdivided and need to remain under the same ownership as the principal dwelling on the property. Following our development standards that would guide our review during the permitting process, they're relatively standard based on the codes that we've researched. First, the ADUs need to be designed to be complementary to the main house, whether they are integrated or detached. This will help preserve property values. The maximum height of a detached accessory dwelling unit is 15 feet, the same as accessory structures. The habitable floor area of an ADU is capped at 50% of the gross floor area of the main house, or 800 square feet, whichever is less to maintain its subordinate status. Detached units must be set back at least 5 feet from the side and rear property lines and no closer than 5 feet to any other building on the property. Further, they need to be oriented to maintain privacy of residents, neighboring properties, through the use of landscape screening, fencing, and window and door placement. Finally, an ADU would be limited to 1 bedroom. Again, the Planning and Zoning Commission held 3 work sessions on this proposal before holding a public hearing last Tuesday. 2 members were absent, resulting in a split 2-3 vote against the amendments as written. The friction centered on 2 key issues. First being the method of approval, conditional use permit via a public hearing process, or administrative approval with neighbor notification procedure. And secondly, whether the ADU should be able to have its own utility service, parking space, and a separate address from the main house. The key concerns that were raised by the majority were that ADUs could change the single-family nature and character of the zoning district by opening the door to rental housing. Particular concern was placed on the potential for new Airbnbs and short-term rentals popping up. As you know, our ability to regulate short-term rentals was taken away from the city by the state legislature. Allowing separate addresses, utility meters, and increased parking will encourage rentals, was the sentiment by the majority. The majority was also more supportive of ADUs for the guests and relatives of the owner versus a rental unit. Finally, they believe that the conditional use permitting process provides for increased oversight and public input. The minority held the opposite view and think that ADUs should be more broadly encouraged to increase affordable housing options in the community and better accommodate demand for multi-generational housing. The proposed use restrictions combined with predefined design and development standards are sufficient to protect neighborhood character. The conditional use process is over-regulatory and may discourage homeowners from pursuing this option. A separate address and utility meter is more practical for rental situations. So the requested action is for you to declare and open the 30-day public comment period. We'll be seeking your guidance and direction on whether to approve the amendments as proposed or with modifications recommended by the P&Z or other changes that you deem necessary, or to drop the proposal together. And with that, I'll respond to any questions.
Can I ask you to go back 2 slides? Does the current proposal authorize separate addresses and utility meters and increased parking?
It does.
Does it allows separate addresses for that unit? So
The
you
current
have-
proposal.
Current
The
proposal.
majority of the P&Z,
Your proposal that you're giving to us, Does that include separate addresses? It does. Okay. One of the issues is, in my mind, on that separate addresses and utility meters would contradict what the concern is about Airbnbs in the first bullet, because if you have a separate address, you could actually have somebody else operate and rent a rental property with a separate address, separate meters, and increased parking. So to me, those are kind of contradictory. So I'm not sure I understand what the majority was concerned about.
They don't want this.
Can I say, Mr. Mayor, my
Am I
thought
confused?
on
Well-
that, a short-term rental wouldn't need its own address or
That's exactly right.
utility. A long-term rental,
But the thing is, it's not designed, these structures are not, the purpose of them is not to have an additional rental property. It's for a family member or a close friend who may be elderly that you're taking care of to live in that facility. It's not, purpose is not to set up a rental structure. That's my understanding. And I'm not sure, does the code allow a rental structure in a residential area of this size?
We're not allowed to.
Right, so ADUs could be rented, and there was a lot of conversation about the duration of the rental, short-term being more impactful on the neighborhood than long-term. And the need for a separate address would relate to more of a rental situation unrelated to the owner of the property.
And so we can't prohibit a unit in a residential neighborhood from becoming a residential property, a rental property?
That is correct. We can't regulate tenure or duration now that the state legislature enacted the preemption
We just
clause.
can't say that we don't allow separate rentals on one single property even.
We can't ownership. Right.
That means if somebody has got a property like this and they sublet it to one person, that person can't, or they let it to one person, that person then can't sublet it to somebody in the auxiliary property? I know I'm getting in the weeds here, but I'm a little confused as to what the majority is asking for.
Can I clarify?
Maybe
Okay,
I think
well,
No, I was just gonna say, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, what you're asking is if you have a structure,
In a residential
the main
area.
the main house,
Yep.
it's being rented, that has an auxiliary dwelling unit, that renter could then sublet
sublet
that
the other
access,
place.
that's what he's asking.
and there was discussion early in the first version as to whether to impose an owner occupancy requirement for the property. And in the end, the Planning and Zoning Commission directed staff to remove that
But the
provision.
owner occupancy is the only way requiring owner occupancy is the only way we can get around Airbnb,
No, of the main house,
main house.
of the main house. So there would be direct oversight of any rental that occurs
So
on the
basically-
property.
The argument was, and Mr. Snyder's in the office, and as a property manager and on P and Z, and he is in the audience. But one of the things that he was concerned with was, let's say that someone has an accessory dwelling unit. I'm going to just say ADU from here on out and quit trying to say that. So they have an ADU, they get transferred to another location due to work. And then Brad's concern, and was then subsequently shared with the rest of P and Z, was that they would then not have any access to the ADU because you can't rent that. If we require owner occupancy of the main dwelling to access also the ADU, then it prohibits them from being able to rent that home should job or life circumstances change and take them away. Was that clear?
Yeah, that's not what I was asking. But it's okay.
But if I rent the main house, if I rent that, then I have an owner occupancy. I have an occupancy, not an owner, but I have an occupancy. So we can, it gets more confusing, because the ADU can be used, and then I can still rent that house with the ADU, because I'm renting to one person, aren't I?
You're renting, so you wouldn't.
Well, I think this is just confusing.
It,
We're just too far in the weeds at that point.
So I guess rather than look at, ownership type or rental, whether a single-family property owner should have the ability to construct an accessory dwelling unit on the property for the purpose of independent living facility, albeit, extended family member, or, somebody, again, not more than two, as a rental property to help defray the cost of their mortgage and cost of living expenses.
Mayor. So I would just, to address William's question also, Matt, is about the subletting, and if you have someone leasing the home and then they chose to sublet, that's between the property owner and that would be handled in a lease.
Right.
Typically, you can't sublet without owner's permission within the lease, so that the city wouldn't have anything to do with it.
Roger. And then,
Well, I think it's important for us to know that if in fact we authorize this, the owner can basically, doesn't have to be a family member, he can basically rent out a mini apartment to whoever for up to two people, right?
And that is the case today. So if you receive conditional use permit for an accessory dwelling unit, the individual or individuals living in that accessory dwelling unit don't necessarily need to be related to the owner on the property.
All right.
and that's how it is now, though.
Yeah, that's what you just said, yeah.
So, and we have a permit process to do this already, so why the change?
Okay,
If I-
so, yeah, one is procedural, whether to maintain a conditional use permit process that involves public hearings before the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council. And the second is to enact objective, clear design development standards to help guide applicants on what will ultimately be determined to be acceptable by the city. So there's a clear path to approval. It establishes the parameters for, many of the considerations that would go into a conditional use permit process in terms of, location, size, design, occupancy limits up front. So those are predetermined rather than case by case.
It's doing away with subjective.
So we're not really changing anything, we're making it less subjective in the long run.
We're doing away with redundancy and making more standardization.
That's what I thought.
My comment, we had a case of approval of a ADU earlier this year that was coming to mind when I was reading this. And I felt that the process the owners had to go through was arduous, to say the least. But I'm not sure, I guess by reading this, I'm not sure if it's less arduous. What I would hope is that it's, if you want to construct a mother-in-law suite on your property, do it. I mean, and we want to be as out of the way as possible. And I felt that when we went through this process earlier this year, it was too much. And so anything that can be done to lessen that would be positive, in my opinion.
Well, what I read in this is it makes it less onerous on the person applying, while it still allows the neighbors to be aware and comment.
Which is fair.
And really, it's the neighbors that are affected by this more than anybody else. So I think this is a smoother way of doing it.
You're saying.
And I can't say we need to do both, because that's one of the things that was discussed in the handout. We don't need to do this and go through the formal process. We don't need to have extra government oversight on something that's relatively simple.
Less process.
Which is what we're trying to do.
I just have one concern that I'm not sure is even addressed in this or part of this. If an owner rents a home to someone, the primary building, to someone, and then rents that auxiliary building to someone else, do you have any, does the primary building renter have any control over who gets to rent that little house in the
Well,
backyard?
see, and that's a problem. I don't think there should be separate rental agreements if somebody's gonna rent the property.
It needs to be for the whole
It
It
property.
needs to be for the whole property, and they sublet to another person if they're gonna do two parties on the property.
That the
The
owner
the
doesn't
original
get-
owner, if the original owner sublets, I can see that as a problem.
If you keep the meters the same and the same parking spaces, then they can't rent two dwellings. They can only rent one dwelling and then they can have
That's
someone
true.
move into it.
That's true.
As long as they're the same, so.
Yeah, they do it under the
They
table.
do it on the
could,
table,
but-
and
yeah.
and I guess mine goes back to what Sarah asked, so if we say yes, it takes it out of coming before, it's just a permit process at that point with y'all downstairs now.
Right.
Which-
And
Okay.
it's less expensive.
Which is
It's
simple,
less expensive for the
less
homeowner
time consuming.
And
Right.
more standardized.
I agree. Okay.
I guess my only issue is, the separate addresses, separate everything. I think it should be the same. I understand people are gonna do what people are gonna do, and I understand that. But I think if it has to be the same address, same meters,
Yeah.
same, that will kind of cut that down and
Is that the
and still
proposal?
make it easier for people to come up and do that. I want people to be able, if they have, to build a mother-in-law suite, if they have disabled children that need to have a little bit of independence, I want people to be able to do that. But I also want to make sure that the neighborhood
Maintains.
They fit in.
stays the neighborhood.
Is that the
Is that the
proposal?
consensus?
So the question is,
Okay.
is that the proposal?
No.
That sounds to be the consensus, is that the
No,
proposal?
that would be a modification.
Yeah.
Right.
So we needed to modify that.
That sounds like consensus.
Yeah, that's a consensus. I don't see anybody jumping up and down against it.
Well, I think, just a question, as far as the whole rental versus not rental, which if we can't regulate it, like, I'm not sure why we need to, personally, or even try to. If it can't be enforced, then, I don't know, then why are we trying to
Right.
do that? That's fine.
This is kind of a different but related issue.
Right, well, and also going back to, one of the reasons was to be able to create affordable housing options.
Right.
And by doing away with the separate address, all that, we're kind of cutting that. So I think we're getting into the weeds, actually, is what I think's going on
I
here.
don't think you need a separate address to have affordable housing.
Well, okay, so part of the ADU is, this is just for instance, let's say I have an ADU on my property and my parents move here, which is never gonna happen, but if they did, so it creates issues as far as how to separate electric bill, how to separate mail, ordering in services, all of those types of things then become problematic. I don't really know how it's adding more, larger government to have, or changing the scope of the neighborhood to have separate addresses and meters and,
I'm not sure the ADUs are a way to solve affordable housing, so I think that's going
help, but,
to, I'm not even sure of that, Mayor, but I don't have any documentation to prove that one way or the other. So, anyway, I've already said what I felt about it, that we should
I'm not
go
a
with the no
realtor,
addresses.
but separate address, and we got some in the audience, and I think some up here. If it's a separate address, separate everything, is it appraised by itself? Or is it appraised with the rest
the
of the
one.
the whole property on that acreage?
That's not our job.
No, because it has its own address, so is it,
it's not a separate.
They're on the
parcel,
same
though.
tax
Not a
parcel,
separate parcel, it would be the same
So it's
tax.
taxed
which
on the
can't be
same parcel.
subdivided or separated in ownership.
so can you have two addresses on one parcel?
Yes.
You add letters, A, B, C.
Maybe, thank you.
It's a practical
So then
consideration,
it's a
really.
duplex.
And, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Gray, if your parents do move in and decide to lease, space to them, you could also write a lease that has utilities included. And
That is
Private
true.
agreement.
So,
That is
so
true.
there are ways around
How many
that.
times they have to cook dinner?
Yeah. Or leave,
No.
not knock on your door.
Any other discussion on this item?
Were we clear?
Where are we?
Well, I think what we basically said, well, Matt, you tell us what you think the consensus was.
Okay, my understanding, yeah.
Make it easy on me.
So the proposal as presented with the addition of a development standard that the accessory dwelling needs to be on the same utility meter and share the same parking as the main building, and will have not be a drive from the main house.
Okay. And Mayor, this is going to public comment period, correct?
Correct.
So we could present it as is, see what the public comment, we can always amend in 30 days when we vote on this, correct?
As long as it's not a substantial amendment that would require re-advertisement.
Would
And
a separate address require additional
I would
public
think
comment?
that's,
I think that's probably a large enough.
That it would
issue where you
require-
Want to amend at the next meeting to avoid those problems and then take the public comment. You could always amend after that as well.
I think it's easier to remove than to add. So maybe add it in, and then after the 30 days, you could always remove.
You mean
And-
add in having a separate address
Well, what we just talked about.
or not
um,
having a separate address?
No, add that component of the P and Z recommendation
Is not to have a separate meter.
is to prohibit that. And then after the public comment period, you could always rescind that provision. I think if you're,
But then we still have to go back to, either way, we would have to go back.
I would think that would be
The public
less.
comment.
Oh,
If you're removing versus adding.
Yeah, if you make the modification, then it's in for the public comment period. If, public comment comes in, council determines to then amend again, you can do that when you come up for the vote, so.
Without having to go to 30 day.
Without having to go
I guess
back
I'm-
again.
You think about something else?
No, I don't think that I am. I think that I'm just not understanding why.
So
it
if
would
you
be
go from
different through both the
more
same
restrictive to less restrictive, I don't think that constitutes a substantial amendment that would necessitate an additional 30 days or whatever extension to the public comment period.
I think some people would disagree with that, but okay.
That's my understanding.
I understand
I could be
that's the
completely wrong.
understanding, but it's, to me, just as important. Okay.
Side of it, you know.
Ma'am?
I would, can we have it just be either, I guess, can we have it be either or? I mean, if you want a different address and different meter, have your own different address, different meter. I mean, do we have to say you have to have a different address, or do you have to not have a different address? I mean, I would not be in favor of, I would be in favor of letting the property owner choose what's best for their family, but
And that's the
How it's
current
currently
proposal.
written would
Right,
allow that.
right.
That's the current,
What they're proposing is that we don't allow them to choose. They
Well, what
cannot
about-
have.
what would happen to all the properties with ADUs that already have that? Already have separate
It would be
addresses and meters?
grandfathered in.
Okay.
Well, I guess this is where I was
Okay,
confused,
so
I guess,
now-
from where
yeah.
it was from. I didn't realize that now we just let them choose in,
In the current proposal.
we just let
We
them
would let them
choose
if
for their
they wanted.
family. And now we're saying that we're gonna choose for their family?
Yes, that with the
I see.
modification, we
I
would
would be
prohibit
against
them
that.
from having
Why, I guess,
separate meter.
why do we care?
We don't. That's the question on the table.
Okay,
Okay,
Some do.
well,
That's
Some
the
care.
question on the table.
got it. Okay, I guess I was
don't
confused.
care.
Okay,
Others do care.
got it, understand.
so
I
the
was
consensus
confused.
is to proceed with the current proposal?
I'm in favor of the current proposal.
Okay,
Going
That makes it
forward
easy.
to the public.
all right,
Okay, so,
okay, we got it.
thank you.
But Sarah,
Want it clear.
we
Yeah,
need
I said going
consensus.
forward to the public.
You're fine
Sorry,
with the
Matt.
current
Going to
proposal.
public hearing for 30 days, and we'll hear back from the public and get their input.
I would like to do
I
that.
would like to hear that as well, actually.
That'll work.
So current proposal.
so you
Okay,
good.
thank you.
Anything else? Yeah, get off while you can.
I don't think
Okay.
anyone wants to come next.
Item number 5 is the regular city council meeting minutes for 10 October. Hopefully, everybody's had time to read that. Any additions, corrections on the 10 October minutes? Okay. Then we have item number 6 is the approval of intergovernmental agreement between the city of Sierra Vista, Cochise County for the establishment of a 700 megahertz simulcast repeater at 100 North Avenue, and that is Commander Heiser.
Yes, Mayor, members of council, sorry you don't have Chief Thrasher this afternoon. You have me. Commander Heiser, Service to Police. Also, I oversee CCOM right now, so I've been very much involved in public safety communications. over the last several months, and I've been asked to present this IGA. And essentially, this IGA is to formalize an agreement between the city and the county to bring us one step closer to enhancing the interoperability of public safety communications in the region, and also bring us one step closer to the long-range goal of having a very strong radio network for public safety, both in the region and eventually connecting up to the statewide. This particular IGA, to give you some history, we switched over. Sierra Vista Police Department operated off of the VHF radio frequency up until 2017, when the 700 megahertz system, which is a trunking system, became operational through mainly Cochise County network. We switched over, and it was an important move for us to move over to the trunking system so that we can communicate more readily with other law enforcement agencies, large incidents, stuff like that. This enhances our ability to communicate. When we made that switch in 2017, it was in the later part of 2017, we realized there was a lack of coverage in this new 700 megahertz system in the west end of Sierra Vista. There's certain pockets of town where officers were needing to actually switch back over to the older VHF system. And that creates quite a bit of challenge. Dispatchers now have to monitor the 2 different frequencies. The supervisor has to monitor 2 different frequencies. So we began conversations with Cochise County Sheriff's Office, and in particular my counterpart I've been working with on this project is Commander Lenin with CCSO. Has quite a bit of knowledge on the radio systems, and determined that probably the best fix for this situation is to add a simulcast repeater to the already existing radio tower at 100 North Avenue, which belongs to the city. And Commander Lenin actually pursued grant funding through Operation Stone Garden. It's a federal grant, and went through the entire process, review process. There's a committee that involved in that, and was approved. And this is a $617,000 project that's actually already underway, but it's important that we formalize this agreement to allow them to complete this project, and also allow them access to the site for any required maintenance. There's a dedicated easement to that radio tower, so that shouldn't be a problem. We do feel like this is going to be a great addition, not only to the community, the citizens we serve, also safer, more enhanced communications on the 700 megahertz system. And in addition, we're going to monitor and see this possibly looking kind of more broadly. We're also working on, in the radio network system regionally, we're also working with Huachuca City on some radio coverage issues in lower Huachuca City, and there's a possibility this project may help enhance that problem as well. From the CCOM perspective and the regional communications perspective, this will be very beneficial. So that's the IGA. As this has been coordinated with Commander Lenin, so we've shared this document. It's been reviewed by the county legal as well, so there shouldn't be any modifications or anything once approved.
Thank you, Commander. Questions for the Commander?
Is there a cost to the community for that? Is there a cost associated with this? I know you mentioned a grant. Does that cover the cost?
That covers the cost 100%. And that grant was written solely for this project. It completely covers it. Yes, ma'am.
Any other questions?
No question.
Comments?
Just so everyone knows, I'll be recusing myself since it's an IGA with the county, and not voting on the item.
Okay. I'm not, I just say it's not, since if you're not directly involved in the action, it's probably not required, but if you feel that you need to, that's fine.
Okay.
Okay. Anybody else?
And I think I understood it correctly that if something happened to their equipment that they're installing, or if something happened to our tower, we are responsible for the insurance. They have insurance for theirs and
Yes, that's
what they're
correct.
adding, and so they're going to stay responsible.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Any further questions, discussion? Then we'll move on. The rest is call to the public, comments to the council, and adjournment. We have a group that would like to address us today. I would ask the Sierra Vista Veterans Memorial Improvement Foundation to come up and make their presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You say it much more eloquently than I do. It's a lot of words and letters. All right. Let's start at the beginning. Good afternoon. I won't say evening yet, but good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Today my name is Glenn Holman. I'm the chairman of the board of directors for the SVVMIF, otherwise known as the Sierra Vista Veterans Memorial Improvement Foundation. We came to the council, and by way of resolution, you guys had given us the go-ahead to start looking at revamping the memorial space in Veterans Memorial Park. And our mission basically is to recognize and memorialize area veterans and the contributions both to our community and to the nation at large. This is the agenda we'll be going through rather quickly, as this is just an update. Our project overview, again, started in 2016 with the resolution we got. And the long pole in the tent, if you will, was having renderings and drawings that we could add to the already established memorandum, but yet unsigned memorandum of agreement. So that's what we're here to show you today. Again, the concept was a V-shaped walking path with an assembly area and the individual markers along that path to help educate and remember the contributions from veterans. We contracted with a company called Wheat Design Group to do this process. The instructions that we gave them were simply that, the V-shaped path. We wanted no destruction to current trees. We wanted to add an assembly area that would help house the positions for the markers, to align and replace the flagpole, which would give the city a flagpole that they can maintain on their own, and a patio wall with a raised flower bed for memorial tiles. And then the marker that is currently there, we promised that we would keep it there. However, it is in bad repair. It would not sustain a move, and it probably would only last about another 10 years if we didn't move it. And so we're talking about recreating it in its entirety when we move it. So it would still be a part of what we have. This is the overview diagram of what it would look like. When you go into further detail in the drawings that we would share as part of the memorandum of agreement, the placement, the structure, and all of the design plans needed for implementation are there for the MOA.
Could you point out north, south, east, and west on that drawing?
Absolutely. So north is at the top. So this is Fry Boulevard below you, okay. And north is up, and east and west. So this is an individual rendering of the apex. But wait, there's more. So this is the path as you would start from one entry with lighted features at the beginning. You show the markers for each of the individual markers that we're going to depict. They each have a different theme, which I'll show at the end. You have the planter and seated wall to make it a more formal area. The plaza that would be for impromptu and design ceremonies and other events. We also have the existing benches and the marker that are incorporated into the design. And then they can, they have to walk back, but obviously we don't have a conveyor belt yet to get them back to their car, but they do have an entry on both sides, and it formalizes the entry into the walking path. This is a look at what one of the markers would look like there on the paver section. So you have a asphalt section that was for the walking path, and then a paver section, which allows us for future expanded fundraising and maintenance costs for the memorial. This is just our overview. It hasn't changed. We are an enduring foundation that would help and pay for the entire cost of the memorial construction and the maintenance of the particular markers over time. Again, the memorandum of agreement is in place. In principle, we've had agreed on everything prior to going to our designer. Simply just need to okay the design and get the drawings incorporated into the MOA prior to signing. We've determined that it would be a three-phased approach if we don't receive all of our funding at once, which is a possibility. And therefore, we would do the path wall, paver, flagpole, monuments, and then the other. Get all the funding, which this community is very giving for projects such as this. We would obviously strive to do it as time as possible. And just to show you what the community sponsorship and the backing behind is, these are the different markers that we have and the different community, civic, and veteran organizations that have stepped forward to be a part of this project. We can proceed with our solicitation process as soon as we have executed the documents necessary from the city. The city's final approval so we can execute the memorandum of agreement. And I'll take any questions.
That's what we'll do first. Questions or discussion? We'll find out from Chuck the particulars on signing the agreement afterwards. Go ahead.
The previous slide, one or two, that showed that one, the sponsors, what are they sponsoring?
So there is a little bit, so we sponsorship in this regard is not monetary. Sponsorship in this regard was their backing of the project and then their backing of the particular marker, and they would help curate the information and the collage that's going to be in that marker. So we have design partners, basically, is what we have.
So they're in kind.
Well, they're
No.
not funding.
They're not funding. So we're gonna do fundraising themselves, but they're actually they're helping us work on the design so that there's community involvement. The approval process for the overall design comes to our design committee, but we thought it was very important that the community be involved in this project and that they had their stamp of approval on it as well.
Very positive.
Okay, so Chuck?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor,
Documents to
members
sign.
of council, I think the best way to proceed with this is to enter into a council-approved agreement with the organization here for a couple reasons. One, I think it raises the visibility of the project, and two, since there is a financial component to it and an improvement to a public place, I think it's important for council to improve that. Within that, you can authorize then my office to work with them, probably through Ms. Wilson, to affect the project.
So we would see this come to a council vote next 2 weeks, in the next council meeting?
You think, Laura, next council meeting, she says that can be done.
No, not this week. I'm talking 2 weeks, or 3 weeks, whatever, the 14th of
December.
November.
November.
First meeting in November,
First meeting in November, okay?
if that meets with your approval, sir.
That would be awesome.
Okay, great.
Okay, any other discussion,
No, I just
comments?
had a quick question. So, and it looks beautiful, by the way, Glenn. When we do the MOU, that doesn't interfere with the procurement, then they can still do the own design work and all that. We don't have to go through procurement process, correct? Okay. Thank you.
That's one of the advantages.
Yep.
Okay.
I just want to thank Glenn and SVV MIF. Oh my God, I said that 5 times. They've been presenting to commission for a while now, and talking to them for a while now. So I just want to say, great job. It looks amazing, and look forward to it continuing.
We're excited.
Getting started.
And I want to thank you guys for doing that as well. It'll make an excellent addition to the park and what's already there. So we really appreciate your efforts and you're working with us on this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll next go on to item number C, report on trips and recent trips. This last week, I spent a morning and then an evening and then a morning up at the Regional Transportation Conference where we talked about a number of issues relating to transportation. One of the most interesting was how we're going to find money when there is none, and how we're going to tax, if we tax or figure a way to tax vehicles using the road that are electric that aren't using the gas tax. So those are going to be some issues coming before the legislature, and those should continue. I know Sarah was up there for a couple of things. Did you want to say anything?
I think one of a key takeaway for me, I'm trying to find it in my notes, I thought was very interesting was actually presented by the city of Douglas, and the transportation manager was at that session with me, that they created their own app to track ridership data, and it enabled them to eliminate an entire position of someone who just did data entry. And so it was not inexpensive to create an app that did everything that they needed it to do, but because the Douglas Rides, they also operate Bisbee Bus, and they operate Cochise Connections. And so their funding is from so many different streams that they have to track their ridership data very, very carefully, because different riders are funded through different sources. And so we developed this app, and there was potential partnership there for City of Sierra Vista in more efficient and better collaboration, better collection of ridership data through technology.
Yeah, we need to see if we can sweet talk them out of that app, Chuck.
We started some conversations, let's just say.
Okay, I'll say sweet talk instead of steal.
Well,
Is that the no?
we've been a good neighbor to Douglas, so I think.
Okay.
Brian,
So what happens next with that, though? That sounds very interesting. What will be
Well,
truly next? I know you're not going to sweet talk.
Well, if we get that app, that gives us a better count on how our own system is functioning, and we can make better decisions on operation of our
Is
transit
our
system.
staff is actually looking into that, or Chuck is, or?
Well, we've just gone through some changes, but if there's something that can assist us in terms of collecting data, that would always be a useful thing.
it was, they saved a whole, you think the investment in it is not, it's not inexpensive.
Right,
But the end result of over time, they saved an entire position of
It's
someone who just
intriguing.
took handwritten sheets from the drivers
Sure.
and then entered them into Excel. And so it was a way of automating
So
that
if we can
process.
streamline one of our processes, that will help.
Yeah,
Obviously.
my question was really, are we actually going to work on trying to get that, or is it?
Setting up another meeting to talk
Okay,
about it
that's what I
already,
wanted.
so yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted.
Okay. Anything else on trip reports, meetings, future meetings? I know everybody's eager to get down to my discussion item. Any future items or council I'm sorry, I missed any reports on latest boards and commission meetings? Okay, and then future.
I did want to comment on what the EAC is looking at, they didn't have anything to come to city council at this point, but they are talking about still continuing to discuss recycling, getting updates from Bren on issues around recycling and how we're doing with that. And there is some concern about some zero waste research that a couple of the commissioners are looking into. So those are all things that commissioners have chosen on their own to look into. They discuss it with the rest of the commissioners, and if they come up with a recommendation for the city, then we'll bring it to the city. So that was all on that.
Anything else?
No, I want to get
Future discussion items, council requests.
I just want to get to
Okay.
the questions.
You ready, Maria?
Getting there.
Okay. I've got to find my slides here. I'm going to try to do this from up here. Next is a recommendation on board and commission restructuring, and it's a concept brief. This is put up by me for discussion only, and what I'd like to do today is go through the whole brief. I know we're running out of time. I'd plan to come back in 2 weeks and bring it back on the agenda so that the council will have had time to read this, think about it, digest it, and then have some meaningful discussion after they've talked with a number of our commissioners, which I'm glad to see you here today, and I appreciate you being interested. So I'll try to do the whole brief and then come back and go back and slide by slide ask questions, et cetera. So maybe everybody will understand what I'm proposing here. Next slide, please. I want to talk about preparation. We've looked at reorganizing commissions for a while now, and in this process, I've reviewed the empowerment plan, the tasking on city commission restructuring, and both in 2016. I reviewed both the council handbooks and the board and commission handbook, and I've had conversations. When I say conversations, over the last 3 or 4 years, there have been conversations with current members of council, former members of council, staff, leadership, commission members, as well as other leaders in the community about how we can make our commissions better. And the whole goal here is to provide public input that's needed by council so that we can make informed decisions. And it doesn't really make any difference, in my mind at least, whether that is through a formal commission process or whether it comes through the board process that goes through staff. The important thing is that we recognize the issues and we get valued and learned input from members in our community, in addition to the normal public process. So if you go to the next slide, and this is a generalization of what boards and commissions do for us, and I'll just let you look at that slide for a minute. Those are the two. They do many more things, obviously, events and those kind of things, but those are the two primary things that all boards and commissions do. Next slide, please. These are the statutory boards and commissions that I'm recommending to the council that we don't change. We keep the same authorization documents and the same mission statements in those authorization documents. But any change in the future, once we decide we're going to have to ask staff to come back with the change of the authorization document, the resolutions, and a refined mission statement so we understand exactly what's going on. The one that's got an asterisk down there is the Youth Commission, and the Youth Commission is kind of a special case because we're working with the young people, and we need to make sure that they have a meaningful experience as a city commission. If you go to the next slide, please. Again, it's a special case. We want them to provide input to us on issues that are affecting the youth in our community. And to be effective, we need to do a little better than we are doing, quite frankly. One of the goals that's unique is we should educate them, give them an opportunity to learn about local government and how it works. Because they will be our future leaders. I personally think the commission should lead and participate in events in the community of their own choosing, primarily, that help and develop them, as well as provides service and support to the community and employment opportunities for the youth. And like all other commissions, they should recommend and organize events, projects for the youth of Sierra Vista. So those are a little bit different. The council needs to be more involved, so we approve and fund activities on a case-by-case basis as our future leaders want to get involved in the community. There are a number of things that we could be doing differently. One is having a youth employment fair at the high school in the springtime for those kids that are looking for jobs, summer jobs, et cetera, led by the youth. And there are other ideas that we need to address to the Youth Commission to see if they will bite into those and actively seek those type of meaningful projects rather than just having a cleanup, which is important to the community that was sponsored by the Youth Commission, where we get kids out to help. We need to give them something challenging and meaningful for them to do. We also need to look at the requirements. I'm not in favor with a two-year appointment. I'm not in favor of giving a senior in high school a 2-year appointment when we know they're only going to be there 1 year because they're going to college. We need to look at the way we've structured that particular commission so the 7th through 11th graders have the opportunity to sit in for 2 years each if they decide to continue on the mission of learning about the city and providing city critical information about what the needs of the youth are. Next slide, please. This is one I've struggled with personally for a while. And what I'm proposing today is we meld the Arts and Humanities Commission with the Cultural Diversity Commission. And that would require developing a new mission statement to cover what is currently done for both those commissions. And one of the things that has been lacking from the part of the council, in my opinion, is the commitment to supportive projects that both the Arts and Humanities and the Cultural Diversity Commission do. And examples, two of those are listed, or three of those are listed: the Community Arts Award, the Student Arts and Craft Fair that's done with Cochise College, and the Cultural Diversity Fair. The council needs to decide: are we going to do those events? And if we do those events, we need to provide the funding and the staff to do those effectively, so we can meet the needs and the interests of the community. One of the things that wouldn't change would be the meeting frequency, and of course it would still be a 7-member board. So it's going to be a challenge to meld those two together, and that's a point that I think is worth discussing. Next slide, please. Commission on Disabilities. What I'm going to recommend is it becomes an ability awareness board. Basically, the mission is pretty much the same, but in this case, it would advise the Director of Community Development on ability issues and policies. It would act as a liaison between the disabled community and the city on those issues. The structure goes down from 7 to 5 members. The staff liaison would remain the Community Development Department. They would meet quarterly rather than monthly, and that would be at a minimum. If there are projects that they're working on that require them to meet more often than quarterly, they would do that. They would still do the ability awards, represent the city at ability events within the community, and of course assist and advise businesses on ability issues alongside with community development. The members would be nominated by the city manager, approved by the city council. And basically the mission doesn't really change that much, but we go to 5-member staffing instead of 7, and we save some liaison issues there as well. I think I'm missing one here. Hang on. Yeah, they're sticking here. Okay, next slide, please. Once again, the Library Commission would become the Library Advisory Board, similar to the previous slide. They would advise the library director on library issues, 5 members instead of 7. The staff liaison would be the library director, meeting a minimum of quarterly. Responsibilities are almost exactly the same: assist the library in planning and monitor service to the public and provide feedback to the Director of Library Services. Again, the appointment would be by the city manager, and the appointment would be approved by council. The next slide would be the Transportation Advisory Board, and this is kind of a new thing where we're melding a couple of responsibilities. And their mission would be to advise the Director of Public Works on transportation issues. The new thing in transportation planning is a multimodal approach, so we consider all the areas of transportation, and the 5 members here would be designated as a primary interest would be 1 representative from the airport, 1 representative that's interested in roads, 1 interested in transit, 1 interested in bicycle paths, and 1 on safe routes to schools, so we have the pedestrians covered too. And it doesn't mean that the pedestrian person is only interested in pedestrian. They could also be interested in airport issues or transit issues or other things that are being discussed. Staff liaison would remain with the Public Works. Again, quarterly meetings at a minimum. And the responsibility is to review multimodal transportation plans for the community. Again, the appointment would be recommended by the city manager and approved by city council. Next slide, please. And these are what I call former commissions. Airport Commission would be transformed. The representation would move to the Transportation Advisory Board. They could also be used for a potential planning task force every 5 years at the airport. We have a master plan that has to be reviewed. In the past several years, there's been no money available from the federal transit to do that, so that hasn't been a requirement. We're probably past time when we need to do the planning task force for the airport. As mentioned previously, the Cultural Diversity Commission is added to the Arts and Humanities Commission, so it doesn't really go away, but it is a former commission. Environmental Affairs Commission would be an issue-driven commission and potential task force. And what I mean by that is when there is an opportunity that we need additional information, we would set up a task force specifically to deal with that specific environmental issue. I don't feel they need to be a standing commission. I think that's probably enough said about that. And the next slide, please. These are potential task forces as may be needed. I mentioned the airport task force for specifically look at the airport plan. If we do a future extension to the library, we may need to have a library task force to look at the needs for the library. The environmental task force would be geared specifically and activated on issues dealing with the environment. And there, of course, we used to have a Citizens Advisory Commission. And again, Citizens Advisory Task Force for any future issues that the council may be necessary, they can activate that. And that task force would be established by a recommendation from the city manager and again, an appointment by the city council. So in summary, what I'm proposing is we refocus and probably just a little more emphasis on the Youth Commission, combine arts and humanities and cultural diversity, restructure the Commission on Disability Issues and the Library Commission, establish a Transportation Advisory Board that would deal with all transportation issues in a multimodal effort. And then I apologize for the error on the rest of the slide. It didn't get corrected before it got printed. Restructure the Airport Commission for a potential task force and having a member of the Airport Commission or a airport interest, I should say, on the Transportation Advisory Board. And then the Environmental Affairs Commission would be on a issue-by-issue type task force. So that's the briefing. Any questions on the briefing itself?
Lots of, what do you want to?
Basically on content. I know I put a lot on there. If we go back, if we want to, we can go back to the Youth Commission and then work down. So.
Want to start on the Youth Commission?
Yeah.
Okay. My thoughts on
And it remains a commission.
My thoughts on that, addressing one thing should address membership, like you said. We've really struggled. I've only been with them this year, but really struggled in maintaining members. We had someone join and then they aged out or they graduated high school, left.
Or get bored.
Or get bored.
And that's.
At League of Cities, they had all the different youth commissions from different cities that came up for a day, and I got to go and meet all the different cities and see how they do it. And one idea, as far as a restructure, is instead of appointing individual members, is there are a lot of youth groups in our town that meet, and we are kind of competing for the youth's attention with all the other myriad of activities and groups and boards and clubs and whatever in town. And instead of trying to be a competing another entity, another meeting to invite it to be a convening of all these different youth boards where they send a representative, or the Buena Student Council versus Cass Student Council versus this club. Really, the membership, the makeup of the board could be up to the board itself. Like once the commission gets going, or the caucus, or I don't know what we want to call it, gets going, would be up to, the membership would be up to the members of the board. Say, oh, well, now the Builders Club from JCMS wants to make sure that they are represented. Well, does this board agree that that youth entity should have a membership on this board? Yes or
And
no?
that's a great idea. I think that's one of
That's
the
a
things
good
we need
idea.
to discuss a little more in depth, because I don't have my problem is the youth is not involved.
Yeah.
And there
I
are things
think
we
it's-
probably can do to help each other out and build a better community. And maybe this is a better approach, and that's something that we
Well,
need
just
to,
the
we need
idea
to
of like,
discuss.
instead of designating an individual, if the entities are sending us an individual.
What I'm gonna suggest as a way to do this is we basically get the leadership from these different youth groups in and say, okay, guys, we want a youth commission. How do we do this? And it may be, we end up having 9 members or 13 members or 6 members, but representing the groups, I think that's a good way to make sure that we have a
Some of them have it
meaningful.
like, call it the youth council or the youth whatever, but it's made up. Not all of them do it this way, but I saw a couple that did it this way, and I thought it was just for membership's sake, that kids, well, I was in Builders Club this year, but next year I'm doing wrestling, and so I'm not gonna do Builders Club, you know, I mean, it just,
I know.
how that goes, it changes year to year. So then if we just get these organizations to approve or
Well,
designate
and
someone
I think
or
the way to do
commit
that
to
is
it.
we probably need to convene something where we get youth group leadership to come in and say, okay, guys, here's what we would like to do. What's the best way for you to think? What do you think is the best way for us to do it? Do we do it by clubs,
Mm-hmm.
organizations, whatever, or we do it by individuals? And again, I said it was a special case, and that's one of the reasons why I said this is a special case, because we have to approach this a little differently
Mm-hmm.
than we would normally do with adults. For some of the reasons you enumerated very eloquently. Anything else?
I agree with Sarah. I talked to both Cass and Buena's student council. Mr. Niski's always looking for someone to come in and talk to him on Wednesdays, where if they had a mission or a goal or something to start looking at, it would benefit them also. So now the other ones going lower, I didn't talk to, but I did talk to those two, and they're very interested in helping out any way they can, and they're elected, so it's the voice of the young people instead of the people. So I agree 100%.
Okay, so we can certainly continue to talk about that next meeting, our next work session. Arts and Humanities, Culture, Diversity, comments?
I agree that we should continue the conversation at another meeting, because it'll be very time consuming to cover all of this. Before I make any comments about your recommendations, I just want to say I appreciate that you spent the time you did to delve into this the way you did. I really like the way you put it together.
I will tell you, I'm
And-
not wedded to any of these, but this is the best I could come up with at the time.
I appreciate that too, and I'm glad it's open for us to have conversations about it. I'm certainly learning from just listening to what we've talked about so far. I'm intrigued by combining the two, the cultural diversity and the arts and humanities. I'm aware currently that there are no members who are actively involved in the Cultural Diversity Commission. That has its various reasons that we don't need to go into. But I also know that arts and humanities is very specific on the kinds of interests they have. And I think we need to just involve those members of that commission and any folks who may be interested in diversity to really sit down and come up with what they believe would be a good way to combine the two. I like, though, that you put those 3 events as a possible things they could be working on, and I can see the possibility of those 2 groups working on those and other issues. I'm wondering in all of it, and I don't have this well thought through yet, but I'm wondering in all of it, a couple of things, that the city manager will make the recommendations for membership.
For appointment.
For appointment. Is that the normal?
Well,
I mean, is that a change?
Yeah, that's a change for those two, well, actually for the boards, the boards, not the commissions. The commission
Oh,
stays the
okay.
same.
Okay.
But the boards it would change because there are 5 members and they're working specifically with the department head.
folks make recommendations or suggestions to you, and then you would kind of.
Well, Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Calhoun, really, it would be a relatively simple change from what we do now. I mean, we have all these commissions, appointment for from the group right now.
Yeah,
So each
yeah.
commission then makes a recommendation, and traditionally, the manager, while I, provides staffing in terms of for the commissions, but does not, provide any oversight or anything like that over a commission. It's a completely separate thing. So we are tasked through the clerk's office with, receiving applications and those kind of things. So essentially, it would just, we would still continue to do that and solicit, applications. It's just the recommendation would come from the city manager as opposed to that particular board.
Okay. And no comment was made about associate members, whether we're going to maintain
Well,
that process?
as far as I'm concerned, if I didn't mention something as a change, it would remain the
Stay
same.
Okay. And
But that's open for discussion as well.
You know what I still struggle with is the way, I think we should take responsibility as city council members to be somehow more involved with what the commissions are doing, that we need to have more back and forth conversations. And I don't know, it's just, for one thing, if they want to make a recommendation to us, have we clarified? Or if, say, John tells the Arts and Humanities that, he thinks we should have murals, do they need to come to the city council and go, it's been recommended that we do? So those details.
This doesn't touch on any of those things.
Okay.
We're talking
Operational
basic
stuff.
structure.
Okay.
And that type of thing. Now, the operations side that you're talking about,
Right.
as far as I'm concerned, that hasn't been addressed as a change yet.
And we can get into that
We
later.
can do that later.
Okay.
I've tried to bite this off as a small piece, and because we could literally talk for days.
Yeah.
About a number of things.
We did, didn't we, Rachel? Well, I personally think this is looking good. I'm a little concerned because I've been liaison to EAC, that it's kind of going away except for special projects.
Task force, yeah.
So I want to think about that a little bit more
That's
and
why I
get a
wanted to
little.
wait 2 weeks so everybody could
Okay.
digest this a little bit.
Okay. And that's all I have to say right now.
She covered a couple of my questions, which thank you. The Arts and Humanities just worked hard rewriting their mission statement. And I think it is going to make it easier since there's no current members on the culture. I'll have this added to the agenda at the next meeting so we can discuss it, about adding it into part of our commission, see what they think about that.
And the other option, I'll tell you that when I was on the cultural diversity side, and I didn't want to go there because I don't think it's appropriate, is eliminating cultural diversity commission. And
Yeah.
I think it's important that we have that aspect somewhere within the city. So that's why.
Okay.
That's one of the other reasons why the melding to me was a better choice than eliminating.
Okay.
Okay, anybody else? Quick comments? Because I know, I'm not, trying not to look at the clock because I know we're over time.
One other quick something that I'll just popped in my head and I'll have to really be digesting more and think longer about is the airport commission. I can tell you that they will be, the group of folks I work with will be really unhappy.
Well, I know they're going to be happy, but the thing I struggled with is, I know back when we had a part-time fueler out there at the airport, and that was the only person we had from city staff out there, they played a very strong and important role. And now that we have a full-time position out there, and we have automated payment for fueling and a few other things, and I look at what they've recommended and what we've been able to do, other than great things like recommending we have a full-time guy there, and having the fueling with credit card.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure we're getting benefit from their time, or even they're getting benefit from their time.
My,
And that's a discussion we need to have.
yeah, I agree with that discussion. I think that much of that commission meeting is kind of updating time, allowing users of the airport, frequent users of the airport, to get updates from both Public Works and from the fort. And I feel that they think that time's very well spent and valuable, but that is more, could be a, what do they call it? It's like a community.
We need, we still need to be able to
It
have
wasn't-
that exchange information. There's a
The
value to
exchange of
that.
information still
And
needs to
I'm not sure
exist,
the
yeah.
commission is the best forum to do that, but we need to figure out a way to maintain that. So that's a great point.
Reducing the membership of Commission on Disability Issues from 7 to 5?
The idea about moving and both the boards had 5 members. And the idea behind that is making sure that,
Changing it to a board, I see.
yeah, see, the
Oh, yeah.
board members would have 5 rather than 7, and that's to try to address the manning the boards and the lack of people interested. This is one that probably has people waiting in line to get on, I know. But it reduces the administrative overhead, and that was kind of the thinking by having 5 members on the boards.
On some of these issues, the minimum quarterly, I think, is a good suggestion. But sometimes if you aren't meeting more regularly, you don't really get to know each other. So I think we may need to work in some kind of mechanism for people to really get to know each other, to work together.
Well,
So-
and again, it's up to the boards and the director that's working with them, if they need to meet, maybe the first, once this is, and again, I haven't put a date as when we're gonna change this, but whatever that effective date's gonna be, if we make the change, that's something that the director may wanna say, if we're gonna meet three months in a row, just so everybody knows each other, and then as we get additional members, we maybe wanna meet 2 months in a row, so everybody understands what's going on and our purpose here, to provide input.
Really,
Policy
you
input.
did some wonderful work here.
Yeah. But again, anything else on this?
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry.
yes,
I was waiting to see if anybody was going to ask for the in-between, but the Transportation Advisory Board, is that going to be, will we do away with the Transportation Advisory Committee?
The Transit Commission is the Transportation
TAC.
Advisory. The TAC will still be there. This could substitute for the TAC. I hadn't
Yeah,
thought about that.
I think it should.
But if that's,
agree.
You're having it
Yeah.
quarterly,
Who composes the TAC right now?
Mike,
yeah, they work for the transit,
Oh,
they work
sorry,
for the
Sharon.
transit.
Mike somebody.
No problem. The TAC was actually changed a few years ago. It used to have formal membership associated with it. It no longer does. Now, the invitee list includes people who are interested in transit issues in general. So it draws a wider audience.
Really a transit advisory committee, and I would hope that one of those folks that works on that commission would also be on the board to fill that transit slot on the board.
I'm just thinking if they're going to be talking about some of the same stuff, maybe we could just hold it the same, make it available to the same people.
Yeah, well,
They're not sitting voting members, but
Yeah, and part of the reason for establishing the Transit Advisory Committee originally is back when we were a rural transit system, it was actually required for us to have a specific transit advisory committee. Now that we are an urban system, it's no longer required, but at the same time, the public thought, and we agreed, that they offered valuable insights into the process. So that is why it has stayed in the format that it is, but we did mix it up a little bit by reducing the formal membership requirements because frankly, attendance had dwindled at those meetings. And since we've opened it up, it's allowed new people to come in and is somewhat re-energized that group.
there's always a full room.
and really the focus on the Transportation Advisory Board is the whole multimodal. So we're looking at everything as one unit and how different pieces affect the other. So it's not just the transit system.
Okay, well, hopefully no one will confuse the two.
Well, I
with
know
the-
it's going to be confused. It's going to be confusing at the start, I'm sure, if we do this.
We could talk at the next meeting too about the differences between the boards and commissions and the statutory things.
Okay, we can do
Mr.
that.
Mayor? After listening to the discussion, just a couple of points, and really what Sharon said about the TAC in terms of opening up membership is what's leading me to say that. We have a lot of commissions, probably more than any city our size, in the state. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But
And we value the public opinion.
that's right,
Right.
and the history of it is such to open it up and get public input and more people involved in the city government. So none of that is a bad thing. But if I ask Jill to analyze how many meetings have been canceled for lack of quorums and those kind of things, I think it might be pretty eye-opening if we did that. So having 7-member commissions, trying to make sure they're all positions are filled and we have meetings, we have meaningful work or tasks for them. We've struggled with some of that, communications, between staff, liaisons, council, how do recommendations get up, all those things occur. And we're in a new age here with social media and communications, and just the idea of the TAC opening up membership so everybody could come instead of just the members or whatever. I think the old board and commission model is old, maybe getting worn out nationwide and long in the tooth, and might provide an opportunity for us to look at other ways to try and achieve the public input that I know the council, we all desire to have. And, that's just some thoughts with regards to how we work with them.
Okay. I don't see anything else on the agenda. Any of the last comments?
Lots to think about.
We'll talk again, this will be on the agenda for the next work session as well. Okay, so we go a little more in depth. So, anything else?
I want to thank everyone for coming.
Yeah, we appreciate you all being here, and hopefully we'll get this resolved.
And we're open to their input.
We're open to input. Meeting's adjourned, thank you.